August, I read 12 books, and today I'm going to tell you guys which ones are worth the read. Out of the 12 books that I read last month, 11 of them are thrillers, so I was definitely in my thriller era. There's a lot of repetitive storylines. I definitely favor some over the others. And actually, at the very beginning of the month, I did a 7 books in 7 days video. So in that video, I take you guys through my thoughts while reading each of the books, and then of course a final review. So if you guys want a little bit more of an in-depth review, definitely check out that video. I'll link it down below, but I will of course give you guys my little like brief wrap up. The first one I want to talk about is The Locked Door by Freda Mcfadden, and this book was really good. This one is about a serial killer's daughter, and about 20 years after her father has been sent to prison, right around the 20th anniversary, crimes start popping up in her area, and they're eerily similar to her father's MO. And all these years, she's kept it quiet about who she is. She doesn't want anyone around her to know that her father is who he is. So while the police are kind of putting things together and suspecting her because of course they know who she truly is, she's simultaneously trying to figure out who around her knows who she is because she's clearly being framed. This book definitely took me on a wild ride, and I really did not expect the plot twist ending. I had a few theories going throughout this book, and I was certain I knew where it was going, but nope. It completely caught me off guard at the end, and I was so surprised. This one was also a pretty, like, not necessarily light read because, you know, it is a little dark, but it was a quick one. It's definitely like a gripping story. It draws you in, so I read this one very quickly. This past month, I also read A Flicker in the Dark by Stacy Willingham, and this is basically the exact same storyline as The Locked Door. These two are like one and the same. I'd say this one is a little bit darker, maybe a little bit more gruesome, but barely. So this one is also about a serial killer's daughter, and again, 20 years later, crimes start happening in the area that are eerily similar to her father's crime. So she's trying to figure out, like, what are the parallels in this crime? Is she about to unmask another killer close to her? Again, I was certain I knew where this one was going, but then it took a turn at the end, and I did not expect it. Also, now I can't remember if I am mistaking the two for both being 20 years later, but some amount of time later, the crimes start happening. This one is definitely 20 years later. And they're so very similar. I feel like you don't have to read both, just one or the other. And personally, I would choose A Flicker in the Dark over The Locked Door. I'm interested to hear if you guys have read both of these, which one you guys think. But although I really enjoyed that book, I also really enjoyed this one. And I really liked the writing style in this one. But both were great reads, just very similar. Next up, I have Not a Happy Family by Lapina, and this is another one that I really loved. Honestly, this was a really good reading month. I don't have many misses this month. This one's like a domestic thriller where the family is extremely wealthy and then the two parents wind up dead. So obviously their 3 kids that are about to get a huge inheritance are all pointed as suspects, especially because they were the last ones to see them before they were murdered. This one definitely took me on a wild ride where I, again, thought I knew where it was going, and then it takes you on a completely different trail and points you to someone else. So the story is spun to send you in all kinds of different directions, and it could truly be anyone. I personally didn't expect it to be who it was. However, I love stories like this. I love a murder mystery in general, but I also just love the wealthy family that has all these dark hidden secrets sort of trope. This was a really great read. Next, I have The Night She Went Missing by Kristen, Byrd, and this is also a domestic thriller about like a tight-knit community in Texas. This one starts off with a prologue of the missing girl basically being in a coma, and then throughout the story it takes you through the point of view of 3 mothers in the community, and each one is kind of forced to look at their own children as the possible suspects. This one was more of a slower read. It was a little bit harder for me to get into this one. It starts picking up towards the end, but I felt like the ending of this one was a little bit lackluster. Like, there was a lot to be desired from this book. I felt like it really could have been good. But this wasn't really a favorite of mine, honestly, and I personally wouldn't recommend it. Out of like all of these thrillers that I'm about to suggest you guys read, I wouldn't recommend this one out of the bunch. Next up, I have The Local Woman Missing by Mary Kabuka, and this one honestly had a lot of mixed reviews. When I was talking about it over on Instagram, I got so many replies and it was so split down the middle. You either love this one or you hate this one. And personally, I love this one. I did end up giving this one 5 stars, mostly because as the story starts off, it's about a missing girl basically trapped in a basement, and it's really dark. It's really, really sad. And then it goes into the story of 2 missing women and then a missing daughter in town, when suddenly 11 years later the missing girl turns up again. Everyone wants to know, what the hell happened? Where have you been? But the story that actually ends up unfolding in this book is totally unexpected. I could not put this down. I was trying to figure out what the heck was going on. I will say the ending is a little cheesy. It's a little bit far-fetched. And while I get it's totally unbelievable, it's just like twisty and turny and kind of interesting. So I really enjoyed this one. It definitely took me on a wild, unexpected ride, and it was not the story that I anticipated it being. Then I have On a Quiet Street by Serafina Nova Glass, and this was another one that started off a little bit slow for me. I was not really feeling any of the characters. I was like, I don't really like any of you guys. It takes on the point of view of 3 women in a small neighborhood. Again, another like domestic suspense thriller. And each woman in this neighborhood has their own issues behind closed doors. One of the women in the neighborhood thinks her husband is cheating. She's constantly trying to catch him in this lie. The other woman, she is newer to town. She has agoraphobia. Everyone in the neighborhood kind of thinks she's a little bit weird, standoffish, because she keeps to herself. She doesn't ever leave the house. The third woman, her son was hit in a hit and run accident by someone in the neighborhood, and she's trying to figure out who did it. The story that unfolds with these 3 women, I really enjoyed. You have to get a little bit more into the book. Like, it's about the halfway mark before things start kind of picking up and you're like putting the puzzle pieces together. But it does get a little bit more interesting, and I do feel like the character development is there. I start to like the women a little bit more than I did when first starting it. These domestic novels with all of their dark hidden secrets inside like these lush, beautiful homes, I just eat it up. So those 6 books were actually 6 of the books that I read for the 7 thrillers in 7 days video. I also read One of Us is Dead, but I lent it to my mom, so I don't have the physical copy here with me. But I lent it to my mom because she's huge on reality TV. We love Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. We watched that one together, as well as like Selling Sunset, which I felt like the characters in this book reminded me of the cast members of Selling Sunset. It was definitely a really, really fun read. It's a thriller for sure, but it's so like funny and lighthearted and ridiculous. If you are into reality TV, if you're familiar with like Christine Quinn or Erica Jane and like those big, ridiculous kind of characters, that is who the women in this book remind me of. I think it was really, really funny. I kept comparing it to like reality TV meets like a slasher film, but super duper entertaining, really bitchy. It was a super fun book, and I highly recommend you guys check it out if you are kind of into that kind of vibe. Next up, the book that literally broke the internet this past month, I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette Mccurdy, and I have been waiting for this book for so long. I pre-ordered it a while back, and I was so excited to read this one. I actually ended up reading it in just a day. I feel like this one's definitely a quick read. It's kind of written more like a diary sort of vibe. This is a memoir of Jeanette Mccurdy's childhood, her upbringing, her time on iCarly, and at times this one was really, really difficult to get through. And I've listened to Jeanette Mccurdy's podcast. She's done quite a few interviews about her mom being a little bit narcissistic, her going through eating disorders, and some sketchy things going on in her childhood acting career. But obviously this memoir dives into like the nitty-gritty and gives you all of the details, and it's very hard to digest. It's super upsetting. It definitely changes the way that you watch those old shows. It makes me sad to know what she was going through when those scenes ended and how her childhood had affected her life up until now. Like, it's still affecting her. The trauma that this girl had gone through is just unfathomable. It really broke my heart, and like knowing that she's not alone in this and there are other child actors that have gone through the exact same thing. It's just really, really dark and really, really sad. The fact that she like grew up to be a pretty normal, well-rounded person after going through all of the things that she's gone through is insane. I can't even. I don't know how she did it. If you also grew up loving Jeanette and watching iCarly, I definitely recommend checking this one out. It is totally worth the read, and I just thought it was phenomenal. Next up, I have Dark Things I Adore by Katie Latari, and I have conflicting feelings with this book. This one's a little chunky. It's a thick boy. It took me a minute to get through this book, but also because the beginning was a little bit slow for me. It is written in 2 timelines. So in the past timeline, it's like this art camp, and there's all of these people attending the camp, but each one of them has these crazy nicknames like Mantis and Moss and Juniper, and like there's just all of these names, and it's a little bit hard to keep track of everyone at the beginning. And then in the current timeline, it's just a little bit slow because you know there's like a plan in action, but you're not really sure what. You're not really sure what's going on or why, so obviously things don't really pick up until about halfway through this one as well. I feel like a lot of time was spent telling the story of the past, which is definitely important, but I feel like it could have been sped up a little bit. As this one started unraveling, it started to get really juicy, really, really good. At the beginning of this book though, there is a trigger warning, and I want to point that out because there are some sensitive topics in here. This book addresses themes of abuse, mental illness, and suicide, and then it has all of the hotlines here. But definitely this one is a very dark read, hence the name. Next up, this is a book that I have seen everywhere. This is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, and this has been recommended all over the place. I felt like the beginning was not necessarily boring, it was a little bit repetitive. But then you get a little bit more than halfway into this book and the twists are crazy. I felt like it was literally so unexpected. Once the twists start coming, you can't put this one down. It just took a totally unexpected turn that I was like, wait, what? I know I'm being a little bit vague, but I don't want to give anything away with this book because it's just like, it caught me so off guard. But I will say, I definitely think that this one is worth the hype. Next, I have The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I finally got to this one. I actually finished this one yesterday. And I've read 2 other books by Lucy Foley. I've talked about them in my past reading wrap-ups, The Guest List and The Hunting Party, which are basically the same book. This one is definitely like a very similar storyline, definitely kind of the same outline as the other 2 books, but I found this one to be a little bit more interesting than the other 2. I don't know if that's just me. This book is about this apartment complex and all of the weird things that go on inside of it. The main character, Jess, is the sister of Ben, who lives in this apartment complex. And last minute, she is telling him that she's going to stay with him a while. She's a little bit down on her luck right now. But when she arrives, her brother is not there. And things start adding up, things get a little bit weird, and she's like, this is not right. So it turns into the story of figuring out what happened to her brother Ben, where did he disappear to, and the connection between all of the neighbors in this apartment, I did not see coming. One thing I will say is like the big reveal of like what was going on and what the brother got like wrapped up in, I felt like that was a little bit predictable. There's a lot of signs and hints, and it seemed pretty obvious, so it wasn't like a shocking reveal or anything. I did actually like this book, but I do feel like Lucy Foley just writes the same books over and over again. And the last book that I have for the month of August is actually the book that I picked for my Book of the Month pick, which, by the way, I do have a referral link down below that you guys can check out. You get your first book for $5. It's a really good deal because you get like a nice new hardcover copy. I've been subscribed to Book of the Month since June, and I really enjoy it. So this is the book that I picked for August. This is When We Were Bright and Beautiful by Jillian Meadow. I can't say the exact thing that this book is about because YouTube is very sensitive. It'll flag it, but it is about a assault that the main character's brother is being accused of, and it's about a big trial case, and all of these crazy secrets come out. I was reading reviews when I finished this one, and a lot of people were saying it was predictable, but I did not see that coming. The twist at the end is very, very dark, and I would absolutely give this book a trigger warning. It was not what I anticipated when reading this one. I do want to read from the author's note. It says that Jillian started working on When We Were Bright and Beautiful in 2016. A couple years later, the Me Too movement exploded, so it was largely coincidental that she happened to be writing a novel about SA at the same time, the world was reckoning with the issue. She originally thought about abandoning the book idea altogether, but in the end, the sight of so many women stepping forward evoked a sense of urgency, and she stayed on course, a decision she never regretted. In the author's note, she talks a little bit about how she kind of like prepared to write this novel and depict the complexity and the nuances, because this book is about a wealthy, handsome white boy convicted of a terrible crime, and him and his family thinking, you know what, we're gonna get out of this one, it'll be okay. It's definitely a very complex topic to tackle, and she definitely makes note of that in her author's note. At the very end, she says, finally, I want to recognize the women and girls who continue to suffer alone in silence. But I felt like this story was very gripping. There's a few things in the writing that I didn't love. Like, I feel like the main character is a little bit misogynistic. In the beginning, I kind of had a harder time kind of feeling sorry for the characters. I didn't feel like any of them were super likable, but getting into the trauma that happens in this book, it was very, very dark and unsettling. And the reason that I had picked this book for my book of the month is because it was just a totally different storyline than what I've been reading or what I would normally pick up, and that's why I like book of the month. I try to pick things a little bit more out of my comfort zone. So this was definitely a different read for me, and I had a hard time with certain things in here as well. This was a very dark month. But yeah, the twist at the ending, it was very unexpected for me. I thought that it was going a different direction, but I did not see that coming, and it truly made my stomach drop. It made me feel really, really ill. I did feel like it did a pretty good job depicting the victims of grooming and how a lot of the times they just don't feel or see that they are a victim. So definitely a heavy read. You gotta be in a good headspace for this one. But those are all of the books that I read throughout the month of August. Hopefully September is a little bit more lighthearted. Might need to go back to romance. I need something light and fluffy after all of that. But definitely some good reads. So I will link all of the books that I mentioned in the description box down below if you guys want to check them out, as well as my book of the month referral code. Remember to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys soon.